Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Voice of Islam Living History program. I'm Dr. Mohammed Iqbal, your host for the program, and today we're going to be looking at part 2 of the Mongol Empire. In part 1 previously, we'd covered from the foundations of the empire by Genghis Khan up to his death, one of the most amazing empires this world has ever seen. In this part 2 of the program, we're going to cover his legacy and those of his sons and grandsons, etc. Genghis Khan died on 18th August 1227, by which time the Mongol Empire ruled from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea, an empire twice the size of the Roman Empire or the Muslim Caliphate at their height. Before his death, Genghis Khan divided his empire amongst his sons and immediate family, making the Mongol Empire the joint property of the entire imperial family. However, to make sure that there would be no quarrel, Genghis named his third son, the charismatic Ogadei, as his heir. So today we are going to really look at the empire from Ogadei's time onwards, and I'm joined by our expert panel, Amjad Hussain. Assalamu alaikum, Amjad.
Wa alaikum salam. Thanks for having me, Dr.
And Arif Ahmad as well. Assalamu alaikum and welcome, Arif.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
We had a great program. I hope listeners enjoyed the first part of the program. So we're going to look at this amazing empire, which stretched from the Pacific Ocean up to the basically towards the end during the 13th, 14th century, towards the Atlantic coast and the Baltics, etc. A massive empire by all accounts, the biggest this world has ever seen. So let's start really with the rise of Ogadei. Arif, do you want to kick off?
Yes, just to give a bit of background, as you mentioned, Ogadei was charismatic. Genghis saw him as very courteous and a generous character. This was one of the reasons why he named him as his heir. And it was this charisma and courteousness and generosity that basically was the reason why the empire carried on being successful. Also, it was because of the organization. Genghis Khan, as we heard in the first part, was a very good organizer. So his legacy was to leave a very good organization. But coupled with the personality of Ogadei, the affairs of the Mongol Empire, they remained very stable during his reign. So one of the first actions that Ogadei took was he sent troops to subjugate the tribes and the nations in the southern Russian steppe. Obviously, it's a large and big empire, so he had to look at all of the borders and the boundaries. And in the east, his armies re-established Mongol authority in Manchuria. By 1230, he personally led his army in the campaign against the Jin dynasty. Again, this was one of the biggest ever Chinese dynasties. And one of Ogadei's generals, he captured the capital.
Subutai, probably one of the greatest empires, generals. Wasn't it? Really?
Absolutely.
He played an amazing role both in the east and in the west. But carry on, go
Absolutely. On. So he was the one that captured the capital of the emperor in the siege of Kaifang in 1232. That was more or less the end. I mean, the Jin dynasty did carry on for a couple more years, but by 1234, the Jin dynasty was finished when the Mongols captured Chaozu. And with the assistance of the Song dynasty, the Mongols, they finished off the Jin in 1234.
It's interesting, isn't it? The Chinese collaborated initially to get rid of the Jin, and now they fell out, and of course they felt the wrath of Ogadei as well.
Yeah, so basically the Chinese then, they still had to face the wrath of Ogadei and his sons. The Song forces, they resisted fiercely, and there was a series of campaigns, and these were something slightly different because the campaigns were held on unfamiliar terrain, which was not hospitable to horses. We heard in the first program that they were great horsemen, but when the terrain is not hospitable to horses, then it made it more difficult. There were new diseases, and there were naval battles. Again, most of the empire was a landmass, so the Mongols were not familiar with fighting naval battles. That just made it a little bit more difficult. So it was one of their most difficult and prolonged campaigns, but eventually they were successful, even though the Chinese fought fiercely.
Obviously the big area they wanted to concentrate was China, but of course they hadn't forgotten about the Western front. And on the Western front, Batu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan and the son of Joshi, the eldest son, was given really the command on that side, and he was supported again also by Subutai, who tended to be everywhere. And of course, Batu Khan was taking really territories from the Bulgars, the Alans, the Kipchaks, Bashkirs. These are all tribes or areas close to sort of the Russian East European. Amjad, if you could take us through the Western Front and really the key developments on that side, when that became the Golden Horde. Yeah, but we will come to that later on.
Having subdued most of these tribes, as you mentioned, Darsab, the steppe tribes in particular, by 1237 the Mongols were encroaching upon Ryazan, the first Kievan Rus principality that they were to attack. After a 3-day siege involving fierce fighting, the Mongols captured the city, massacred its inhabitants. Then they proceeded to destroy the army of the Grand Principality of Vladimir at the Battle of the Sit River. The Mongols captured the Alanian capital Magas in 1238. By 1240, all the Kievan Rus had fallen to these nomadic Asian invaders, except for a few northern cities. Mughal troops under Maknan in Persia, connecting his invasions of the Caucasia with the invasion of Batu and Subadai, forced the Georgian and Armenian nobles to surrender to them as well. Giovanni di Bano Capriani, the Pope's envoy to the Mughal Great Khan, travelled through Kiev in February of 1246 and wrote, "The Mongols attacked Russia, where they made great havoc, destroying cities and fortresses and slaughtering men, and they laid siege to Kiev, the capital of Russia. After they had besieged the city for a long time, they took it and put the inhabitants to death. When we were journeying through that land, we came across countless skulls and bones of dead men laying around on the grounds. Kiev had been a very large and thickly populated town, but now it has been reduced almost to nothing. For there are at present times scarce 200 houses there, and the inhabitants are kept in complete slavery."
This is recorded history from the envoys of the Pope, and it showed the horror Europe was facing as well. Many of the Muslim empires were facing this, and the Chinese were as well, but Europe saw at first hand what they were able to do.
It was absolute brutality, Doc Sam. Again, the Mongols, had built their reputation on basically not showing any mercy, and it showed, how they were prepared to destroy very densely populated towns and basically reduce them to practically nothing.
So the next bit we have is the push into Central Europe. So the Russians really faced the wrath. The Chinese did as well, as the Muslim empires had. We covered in the previous program. Let's look, Arif, a little bit at Central Europe and how they fared at the onslaught.
Absolutely. And, we were just talking about fighting on one flank in China, and now the other flank in Europe. It just shows you the sheer size of the empire and how much they had to cover. So the advance into Europe continued. The Mongols, they invaded Poland and Hungary. And when the western flank of the Mongols, they plundered the Polish cities, a European alliance built up. So they were the Poles and the Moravians, and the Christian military orders of the Hospitallers and the Teutonic Knights and the Templars. They all assembled enough forces, and they did halt briefly the Mughal advance. However, the Hungarian army and the Croatian army and the Templar Knights, they were beaten by the Mongols at the banks of the Sejo River in April 1241. And that effectively meant that Europe was under the control of the Mongols.
The Hungarians and Polish were quite powerful, really, countries and empires at that stage when the Mongolians were rolling over them. And the relative force was quite small compared to the overall Mongol armies. But luckily for Central Europeans, Vienna which is one of the jewels for Europe, was saved before the Mongols could move on, because unfortunately for the Mongols, Ogadai died, and in December 1241, at his death, Batu and the other leaders of the clans, Mongolia, had to retire because they had to elect a new leader, which was customary amongst the Mongols. So Vienna was saved. Ogadai's death was a bit early, I suppose, in many ways, just because he loved his drink, didn't he?
Well, despite all these military, successes everywhere, there was dissent within the Mughal ranks as well, and Ogadai was well known for his alcoholism, and this was the most likely cause of his death. He was Emperor Kagan, but not a dictator. Like all Mongols,
I mean, he had his good qualities,
time,
clearly, because the empire expanded massively under him after Genghis Khan, leaving aside the alcohol, but just cover some of his qualities.
Well, he was raised and educated as a warrior from childhood. And as the son of Genghis Khan, he was part of his father's plan to establish a world empire. Ogadai was a firm leader, but at the same time, he was a humble man who did not believe himself to be a genius. He was willing to listen and to use the great generals that his father had left him, as well as those he found himself to be most capable. So he would listen to his advisors. He was a very pragmatic person. Much like his father, he looked at the end rather than the means. His steadiness of character, his dependability were the traits that his father most valued, and that gained him the role of a successor to his father, despite his two older brothers. So having established the capital of the empire at Karakoram,
that was a major feature during his reign, because Karakoram became a
focal point for everything.
Yeah.
And Ogadai expanded the empire through some, major administrative changes that he brought about.
So now we come to the post-Ogadai power struggles. That's from around 1241 to 1251. Ogadai's widow was very powerful in the empire, so at his death, that's Toragine, I think, is pronounced, but she took over the empire temporarily before the next Kurultai, which is the gathering to elect the new great Khan, could be done. She took over, and she really started planning for the succession of Ogadai's oldest son, Gayuk. And that took, I think, 3 to 4 years before they could actually have the Kurultai held together. However, at this stage, you can see dissension setting in. On the Western Front, Batu, the ruler of the Golden Horde, who was really son of Joshi, he refused to come to the Kurultai, claiming that he was ill and that the Mongolian climate was too harsh for him. The resulting stalemate lasted more than 4 years, that's right, and further destabilized the unity of the empire. However, things moved on, and Arif, if you could take us what happened, because Gayuk eventually was elected, but just take us through that process.
Yes, it's quite interesting that obviously whenever a successful leader passes away, there's always a power struggle. This happens in most political systems. So what happened here is that Genghis Khan's youngest brother, Temugai, he wanted to seize the throne. He threatened. He said, he felt that he was the rightful heir. So as a result of that, Gayuk came to Karakoram to try and secure his position. Batu also agreed to send his brother Berke Khan and some generals to the Kurulati, which is basically a council that was convened by Toragan in 1246. By this time, Gayuk was ill, and he was also an alcoholic. But because he had some very successful campaigns in Manchuria and Europe, this gave him the stature. These are people who respect military conquests. And so these campaigns, they gave him the stature that was necessary for him to be a great Khan. As a result of these, he was, duly elected at a ceremony attended by the Mongols and foreign dignitaries from both within and without the empire. That helped cement his position. Although some of these people were vassal nations, puppet states, they were representatives from Rome, and other places, and they came to show their respects and also to conduct diplomacy, and that helped to secure his position as the successor. After he was elected or appointed as a leader, he took steps to reduce corruption, and that he would continue the policies of his father Ogedei. However, as a break with his mother's policies, he restored his father's officials to former positions, and he was surrounded by various individuals like Ugya, Neyman, and some of the Central Asian officials.
These were some of the prominent tribes around the Mongolian plains. Restored some.
So those commanders, Han Chinese commanders, who'd helped his father conquer northern China, he restored their positions. Yeah, he then continued his military campaigns in Korea, advancing into Song China in the south and Iraq in the west. And he also ordered an empire-wide census as well, because he felt that was important to see who was in his empire.
So, Amjad, it's really when it comes to the death of Gayok in 1248 when major dissension started. So if you can take us through that phase.
Well, in 1248, Gayok raised more troops and suddenly marched westwards from the Mongolian capital of Karakoram. The reasoning was unclear. Some sources thought that he was maybe planning to conduct a full-scale conquest of the Middle East, or possibly to make a surprise attack on his rival cousins Batu Khan in Russia. Suspicious of Gayok's moves, Baki, the widow of Genghis' son Toyo, secretly warned her nephew Batu of Gayok's approach. Batu had himself been travelling eastwards at the time, possibly to pay homage or perhaps with other plans in mind. Before the forces of Batu and Gayok met, Gayok, sick and worn out by travel, died en route to Xiazang, possibly a victim of poisoning. To decide on a new great Khan, Batu called the council Kuritai on his own territory in 1250.
So just to remind listeners again, because we're looking at the dynasty and really, so Batu again, it was the son of Joshi, the eldest son, and already gaining quite a bit of power on the Western Front. But go on, carry on.
To decide, obviously, for the new leader, the great Khan, Batu called the council on his own territory in 1250. And as it was far from the Mongolian heartland, members of the Ogadais and Chakadais families refused to attend. The Kuritai offered the throne to Batu, but he rejected it, claiming that he had no interest in the position. Batu instead nominated Monke, a grandson of Genghis, from his his son Toyo's lineage. So Monke, is that right?
Monke,
Monke.
Khan.
Yeah, Monke was leading the Mongol army in Russia and the northern Caucasus and Hungary. Pro-Toy faction supported Batu's choice, and Monke was elected.
So this was quite a clever move by Batu, really, to appoint Tolu's son to take over, etc. So carry on. So then
Batu sent Monke under the protection of his brothers Berke and
Takhtimur,
and his son Sartag to assemble a more formal council to be held at the one in the Arals?
In the Arals,
yeah. And the supporters of Monke repeatedly invited the other major Ogadai and Chagadai princes to attend the council as well, but they refused each time. The Ogadais and the Chagadai princes refused to accept a descendant of Genghis Khan's son Toyo as the leader, demanding that only descendants of Genghis Khan's sons Ogadai could be the great Khans.
So despite the dissension and bit of turmoil, Monke Khan on the 1st of July 1251 was elected as the great Khan of the Mongol Empire. Interestingly, this marked a major shift in the leadership of the empire, transferring power from the descendants of Genghis Khan's son Ogedei to the descendants of Genghis' son Tolui. It's a big change, and that tends to sort of follow. And it's amazing how empires have these shifts. Monke confiscated the estates of the Ogadai and the Chagatai families that had rejected his rule and shared the western part of the empire with his ally Batu Khan, who played a clever card, really, as I said earlier on. After the bloody purge, Monkey ordered a general amnesty for prisoners and captives, but thereafter the power of the great Khan's throne remained firmly with the descendants of Toloi. So Arif, if you could then take us to the next stages, because the empire was still unified, still under one great Khan, and kept on expanding, and take us through Mongol's rule. Please.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, whenever you have an empire, you always have to consolidate your power, remind people who's in charge. So Mongol, he assigned his brothers, Hulagu and Kublai, and they were basically to rule Persia, and Mongol held China, respectively. In the southern part of his empire, he continued the struggle against the Song dynasty, and in order to outflank the Song from three directions, he dispatched Mongol armies under his brother Kublai to Yunnan, which is in southwest China, and under his uncle Leku to subdue Korea and pressure the Song from that direction as well. We talked about this in the previous program, where obviously they were attacking on more than one flank.
I mean, the Chinese campaigns lasted, I think, 70-odd years in total.
Absolutely.
So it's quite amazing, really, the planning, but you're absolutely right. We did cover some, yeah.
Yeah. So Kublai, he conquered the Dalai Kingdom in 1253, and the Dalai King actually defected to the Mongols.
This is sort of towards the Tibetan plains,
wasn't
it? That's right, yeah.
And his defection helped them conquer the rest of Yunnan. Mongol's general, Korodai, he stabilized control over Tibet, and one of the things which he did was actually convincing or inducing the monasteries to submit to the Mongol rule. The monasteries obviously had a big influence at that time, and he felt that if he could get them to submit to Mongol rule, it would help consolidate power. Subutai son, Urankadi, he reduced the neighboring peoples of Yunnan to submission, and he went to war with the kingdom of Diavet, which is modern-day Vietnam. They were under the Tran dynasty in northern Vietnam. This took place in 1258, but they actually had to draw back. The Mongol Empire, they tried to invade Diavet again in 1285 and 1287, but they were defeated both times, so they were not successful in Vietnam.
So major success is really heading in that part of Southeast Asia,
China, and Tibet.
China, etc. Yeah. China more or less now coming under
more or less completely under control.
And then Amjad, we look at Hulagu's army and what a devastation they caused in the Muslim world. Just take us through that phase, and we're going to cover some of it later on as well. But just
it's a massive time of turmoil, because Hulagu was ruthless. Of course, he was a very able general as well. So Hulagu's army greatly expanded the northwestern portion of the Mughal Empire, founding the Ikhanate of Persia, a precursor to the eventual Safavid dynasty. So under Hulagu's ruthless leadership, the siege of Baghdad in 1258, which is well known, they just basically leveled the whole city.
We're going to discuss it a bit later on as well under the Khanate.
So they destroyed basically, the capital of the Islamic Caliphate, and greatly weakened Damascus, causing a shift in Islamic influence to the Mamluk Sultanate in Cairo, and ended the Abbasi dynasty. When the Caliph al-Mustasim refused to submit to the Mongols, Baghdad was besieged and captured by the Mongols in 1258, as I mentioned, and subjected to merciless sacking, and event considered one of the most catastrophic events in the history of Islam, and sometimes compared to the rupture of Kaaba. We will obviously come back to this later. With the destruction of the Abbasid Caliphate, Hulagu had an open route now to Syria and moved against the other Muslim powers in the region. His army advanced towards the Ayyubid ruled Syria, capturing small local states en route. When Hulagu headed further west, the Armenians, the Seljuks, the Rum, and the Christian realms of Antioch and Tripoli submitted to the Mongol authority, joining them, and some of them joining them in their assault against the Muslims. They thought it was an opportune, time for them to, particularly the Armenian Christians and the Christians from Antioch, they took advantage of this. So they joined the Mongols in assaulting the Muslims. While some cities surrendered without resisting, others fought back, but those who fought back, their populations were ruthlessly massacred and the cities were sacked.
So this was probably at the height now of the Mongol Empire, as I said, from the Pacific Ocean up to, Russia, Poland, into the Mediterranean, etc. So quite an amazing achievement over a short period of time. This is probably a good stage now to have a break, because in the next section, we're going to look at the fragmentation of the Mongol. It still remained an amazing and a great empire, but it went into 4 separate parts, and we're going to cover that in a lot more detail. So let's have a little break, and we'll come back to it. You've been listening to the Voice of Islam Radio and the Living History program. In today's program, we're talking, as this is part 2 of the Mongol Empire. We hope you enjoyed part 1 that we did previously. For those of you who love your history, please visit the website www.voiceofislam.co.uk, and you'll be able to see all the different history programs that we have done. Just look under the program section and you'll see Living History, and our podcasts are there with the appropriate titles for all the programs we've done. We've started from origins even of mankind, and what the different ideas have been presented to us historically of our origins, the development of language, the Islamic empires, the Western empires, and then we've got people's personal perspectives, as well as looking at some of the great figures that have shaped history, like Cyrus the Great as well, the great Persian emperor as well. Please do give us your feedback as well. Our hashtag on Twitter is VI Living History. It'd be great to hear from you, what you like, any suggestions that you might want to make for myself and Arif and Amjad as well. But do visit the website and listen to some of the other interesting programs on Voice of Islam. Welcome back to the second part of the great Mongol Empire. We were dealing with the descendants of Genghis Khan and how they contributed to the Mongol Empire, its expansion, etc. But we reached a stage before we stopped on the possible fragmentation of the empire. Although tensions had started with the leadership of the Mongol Empire being passed from Oghode to the Toloid house through Monke. After his death in 1259, the division of the Mongol Empire became much more apparent and permanent. The Mongol Empire fractured into autonomous khanates headed by the grandsons of Genghis Khan, and these were the Golden Horde in the northwest towards the Russian Eastern European side, headed by Berke Khan, which we mentioned earlier on, and he was the son of Joshi, the eldest son. The Chagatai Khanate in the middle, headed by the sons of Chagatai, and the Ilkhanate in the southwest, headed by Halagu, the son of Toloi, and the Yuan dynasty in the east, which is basically the Chinese dynasty. We'll talk about it in a lot more detail, based in modern-day Beijing, headed by Kublai Khan, the son of Toloi as well. So 2 sons of Tolai, 1 son of Jochi, and the Chagatai obviously remained active as well. The 4 Khanates each pursued their own separate interests and objectives and fell at different times, although the Yuan emperors held the nominal title of Khagan of the empire, keeping everything unified under one rule at different times. So Arif, just take us through from the death of Monke in 1259. What happened?
So after Monke's death, Arik Bok, who was a younger brother of Kublai Khan and Halagu, he took advantage of their absence. They were not there at that time, and he used his position in the capital, Karakoram, to win the title of Great Khan for himself. The representatives of all the family branches, they proclaimed him as the leader at the council that was convened in Karakoram. Now, obviously, Kublai, when he learned of this, he wasn't very happy, and he summoned his own council, Korelati, at Kaiping, and nearly all of the senior princes in northern China and Manchuria, they supported his candidacy over that of his younger brother, Arik Bok. Obviously, this led to conflict.
Civil war
basically.
Between the Toloid.
Absolutely. So, during that Tulid civil war, Haluki Khan of the Ilkhanate supported Kublai, whilst Berke sided with Arik Bok. Obviously, there were battles between the armies of Kublai and those of his brother Arik Bok. And these actually included some forces which were still loyal to Monkey's previous administration. Kublai, he prevailed. His army easily eliminated Arik Bok's supporters, and they seized control of the civil administration in southern Mongolia. After his defeat, Arik Bok in 1264, he freely acceded. He accepted Kublai's enthronement and his leadership.
So let's now look at each of the Khanates in more detail, as each one had a major impact on the people living from Europe to China, and in particular the Muslim world. We'll start with the Kublai Khan, because China represented their greatest challenge and efforts. Genghis Khan had made that clear from the start and concentrated on China. In many ways, the Chinese dynasties had the biggest impact on the Mongol Empire, and they wanted to make sure they had them in their firm grasp. The establishment of the Yuan dynasty, which was from 1271 to 1368 by Kublai Khan, accelerated the fragmentation of the Mongol Empire, but at the same time, it set the greatness of the Mughal Empire. Most of us know much about the Mongol Empire in relation to Kublai Khan and Marco Polo and all that, especially in the Western world. In 1304, a peace treaty among the Khanates established the nominal supremacy of the Yuan dynasty over the Western Khanates. However, this supremacy was based on nothing like the same foundations as that of the earlier Khagans. Conflicts such as border clashes among them continued. Amjad, do you want to take us through about the Yuan dynasty? Because it was essentially a Mongol empire, but of Chinese character, as the Chinese always say.
With a Chinese flavor,
Yeah.
So after the defeat of Arik Bok in 1264, Kublai Khan's enthronement was largely accepted by most of the Khanates, although some struggles did remain and continue. Under Kublai, the Mongols were eventually successful in their campaign against China, and the Chinese Song imperial family eventually surrendered to the Mughals in 1276, making the Mongols the first non-Chinese people to conquer all of China. In 1271, Kublai...
In fact, just to give you a break, listeners might want to know that hopefully after this, we will be covering the Chinese civilization and Chinese dynasty as well, and the Yuan dynasty will feature in that. But sorry, Amjad, carry on in this.
Well, to cement, their succession in China and stamp their own authority, in 1271, Kublai renamed the new Mongol Empire in China as the Yuan dynasty and sought to, basically stamp his own authority and his image on and become the emperor of China, and to win control and, heart and mind of the Chinese people. Kublai moved his headquarters to Dadu, the genesis of what later became the modern city of, as we today call Beijing.
Yeah, right.
His establishment of a capital there was a controversial move, but obviously he wanted to consolidate his gains there.
In fact, this was one of the reasons why the civil war took place with Arik Bok, because Kublai Khan had more interest around China and moving the Mongol Empire closer to the Chinese civilization, etc., whilst Arik Bok wanted it to remain in Mongolia, etc. So that's just the background. But sorry, carry on, yeah.
Well, it was a controversial move, nevertheless, among the Mongols, who accused him of being too closely tied to the Chinese culture. The fleets of Yuan dynasty attempted to invade Japan in 1274 and again in 1281. But both invasions failed, and a large number of their ships were destroyed in the sea storms.
In fact, this was quite an amazing thing, Amjad, when I was reading. We don't have enough time in this one, but it was one of the biggest armadas apparently raised. Twice they went towards Japan, and because of natural storms and disasters, they were absolutely annihilated.
These sea storms were actually named kamikaze, the divine winds, on, on both occasions. Yeah. So the Chinese rejoice and they call them divine intervention, really.
The Japanese,
and kamikaze, hence we get to this day the name kamikaze.
The Japanese were very, very lucky, in all honesty. They didn't have to suffer, I suppose, the rule of the Mongols. So Kublai Khan, after having established the Yuan dynasty, died in 1294. He was succeeded by his grandson Timur Khan, who continued Kublai's policies. At the same time, the Toluid Civil War, along with the Berke-Halagu War, which we'll come to later on, and the subsequent Kaidu Kublai War, again, these are descendants of Jochi and Chagtais, etc., and Tolui. This greatly weakened the authority of the Great Khan over the entirety of the Mughal Empire, and the empire fractured into autonomous khanates, as mentioned earlier on. Only the Ilkhanate remained loyal to the Yuan court, but endured its own power struggle in part because of a dispute with the growing Islamic factions within the southwestern part of the empire. A variety of rebellions took place later on against the Yuan dynasty and its rules, and eventually the Chinese rose up to really remove and get rid of the Mongol control, and it was restored back to the Chinese, as it were, leading up eventually to modern China, etc. But as I said, we'll cover the Chinese civilization later on. Let's now look at the Chagatai Khanate, Arif. Perhaps you could take us there. So the Yuan covered the Chinese areas and dynasties. Chagatai was sort of Middle Central Asian part.
Yes, just to remind listeners that Chagatai was the second son of Genghis Khan. And so obviously he was the Chagatai Khanate, and his descendants or successors, they were the people that formed the Chagatai Khanate. He died in 1242, and he was actually succeeded by his grandson, Kara Heluju. He in turn was succeeded by his son, Mubarak Shah. And from the name, you can obviously tell that he was a Muslim. He was actually the first Chagatai Khan who converted to Islam. But he was actually deposed and then reinstated in 1265 with the help of his mother. However, his reign did not last long, and he was deposed by his cousin with the backing of Kublai Khan. The person who deposed him, his cousin, was Ghiyas-ud-Din Barak. Barak refused to accept Kublai Khan's authority.
Even though he'd initially helped him.
And this is a recurring theme that people who help, they actually then turn against them. So, because he didn't accept Kublai Khan's authority, he was defeated by Kaidu.
Kaidu happened to be the grandson of Ogadai, so you could see the Ogadai house trying to make a comeback and have something.
Yes, absolutely. And Ogadai, because of that, he in effect became the de facto Khan of the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia.
So whilst they had the title, he was essentially running it until his defeat, but we'll come to that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So he ruled part of modern-day Xinjiang and Central Asia during the 13th century, and he actively opposed his cousin Kublai Khan, who had established the Yuan dynasty in China until Kaidu's death in 1301. The leadership of the Chagatai Khanate was restored, but it was fairly weak. It was always remaining fairly weak. From this Khanate emerged a new Turco-Mughal commander who was one of the greatest military tacticians and leaders in history, Timur, who was around from 1336 to 1405. He was also known as Tamerlane, Timur the Lane, and he was the founder of the great Timurid Empire. He was born into the Baras Confederation in modern-day Uzbekistan, and acting officially in the name of Surgamatish, the Chagatai Khan. He gained control of the western Chagatai Khanate, and he conquered large parts of Central Asia, primarily Traxonia and Khorasan, from around 1363 onwards. He also formed various alliances in Samarkand in 1366 and Balakh in 1369, and he was recognized as the ruler over them in 1370. While he was commander and emir, he was nominally subordinate to the Khan, but in reality it was now Timur that picked the Khans, who became merely puppet rulers. The western Chagatai Khans were continually dominated by the Timur princes in the 15th and 16th centuries, and their figurehead importance was eventually reduced to basically total insignificance.
I think just to say, whilst we want to concentrate on Genghis Khan and his sons and grandsons, Timur was a Mongol essentially and played a great role, which touched on the linkage to Babur and all that in the Mongol, in the great Mughal empire in one of our previous programs as well. But just to also remind listeners that Timur was also the grandfather of the Timurid Sultan, astronomer and mathematician Ulugh Beg, who ruled Central Asia from 1411 to 1449, and the great-great-great-grandfather of Babur, the founder of the Mughal Empire. So you can see the linkages. And Ulugh Beg also made a major contribution to understanding of astronomy, etc. But that's for a different part.
So Timur, he wasn't from the direct line of Genghis Khan, but he was obviously a very prominent Mughal. He contributed significantly to the legacy of the Khanate, and he made a very, very important contribution to the legacy as well.
So we've covered two of the Khanates now. So with the Yuan, with Kublai Khan ruling and from the house of Toloi, then from the Chagatai line, which really varied between the descendant of Ogade as well, Kadu, I think was his name, who played that part, and then Timur really taking over the Chagatai Khanate. Let's move now to the Il Khanate, which again was led by Hulagu from the Toloid house. Amjad, if you could take us through his Khanate.
No, absolutely, Rasad. The Il Khanate was ruled by the Toloid house of Hulagu. It was formed in 1256 during the reign of Mongol Khan and comprised of Iran, Iraq, Transcaucasus, Eastern Asian Minor and Western Turkestan. In 1255, Mongol charged Hulagu with leading a massive Mongol army to conquer or destroy the remaining Muslim states in southwestern Asia. Hulagu's campaign sought to subjugate Persia, the submission or destruction of Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad, the submission or destruction of the Ayyubid states in Syria, based from Damascus, and finally the submission or destruction of Bahari Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt. It is believed that Hulagu was given the largest Mongol army ever assembled to carry out this mission. 2/10 of the empire's fighting men were gathered for the Hulagu's army. Mongol ordered
So in many sense, this was much, much bigger than the original Genghis Khan army when he went to the Khwarezmi to destroy that. So the poor Muslims must have been shuddering.
Yes, absolutely. I think it showed how important this mission was as well, to give that amount of resources as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So Mongol ordered Hulagu to treat kindly those who submitted and utterly destroy those who didn't. I think this is typical of a Mongol strategy, always been,
So I think he forgot the kindness bit, didn't he?
Or they never, yes, it was a tokenistic at best.
Yeah.
So Hulagu vigorously carried out the latter part of these instructions. So Hulagu's Mughal army set out for Baghdad in November 1257. The Mongols under Chinese General Gua Khan laid siege to the city on January the 29th. In 1258, constructing a ditch and wheeling of siege engines and catapults, the battle was shored by siege standards. By February the 5th, the Mongols controlled stretch of the wall. The Caliph tried to negotiate but was refused. On February the 10th, Baghdad eventually surrendered. The Mongols swept into the city on 13th of February and began a week of destruction. The Grand Library of Baghdad, the House of Wisdom, containing countless precious historical documents and books on subjects ranging from medicine to astronomy, was destroyed. Survivors said that the waters of the Tigris River run black with ink from the enormous quantities of books flung into the river. Citizens who attempted to flee were intercepted by the Mongol soldiers and eventually probably massacred.
Oh, it's absolutely one of the greatest tragedies, I think, that befell the Muslim world.
I mean, some of those chronicles would obviously later on wrote, and now we can read, is basically horrific reading it makes. So the death count varies widely and cannot be easily sustained. A few low estimates is about 90,000 dead. Higher estimates range from 200,000 to 1 million. The Mongols looted and destroyed mosques, palaces, libraries and hospitals. Grand buildings that had been the works of generations were burnt to the ground, literally in a matter of days. The Caliph was eventually captured and forced to watch as his citizens were murdered mercilessly and his treasury was plundered.
I think this was the Caliph also. We covered in the previous programs, Arif, under the Abbasid, he was rolled up and trampled to death so that no blood would
Absolutely brutally murdered, yes.
There are many accounts. For instance, the Venetian merchant Marco Polo states that Hyrcanus starved the Caliph to death. And there is no corroborating evidence for that. But however, there are many accounts. Most historians believe that Mongols and Muslim accounts that the Caliph was rolled up in a rug.
Yeah, this is the more common
theme, yes. And the Mongols rode their horses over him, and some said they trampled to death eventually. And they believed that the earth would be offended if it touched the royal blood. So, these are just people with fairy tales. But
it's showing the brutality of this. Obviously, they wanted to make an example out of him.
So let's move on with the Baghdad, the ravaged and Damascus weakened, clearly.
Well, the center of Islamic power shifted to the Mamluks eventually with the Sultan of the Sultan's capital of Cairo, and Hyrcanus sent a threatening letter delivered by an envoy to Mamluk Sultan Qattuz in Cairo, demanding that Qattuz open the city, or it will follow. As was muted out, the destruction muted out of Baghdad. However, when Hyrcanus learned the death of the great Khan Mongol, he withdrew his main forces to Iran near Azerbaijan, leaving behind 2 tumans, thus about 20,000 men. And
I think this was under the command of Kitbuka.
Oh, Kitbuka, Kitbuka.
So basically, Hyrcanus, for 2 reasons. One, I think the news of the death of the great Khan and Hyrcanus needing to be there to really elect Kublai Khan, etc., and leaving behind Kitba with 20,000 Tumans to take on the Mamluks or the remaining Muslim empire. But yeah, carry on.
So basically, Hyrcanus himself departed from Mongolia to take part, as Dr. Saab says, in the imperial succession. Meanwhile, the Mamluks managed to give a crushing blow to the Mongols and defeat them at the Battle of Ain Jalut in Palestine.
I mean, this is going to be a separate program we're going to do because it's such an important battle between the Muslims and the Mongols. In many ways, it was the savior of Islam, but Bebaz and Sultan Qattuz, really. So, in many ways, luckily for the Muslims, the biggest contingent of the army was removed by Hyrcanus. He went back to take part in the succession of Kublai Khan. And when he learnt of the defeat of the Mongols under Kitbuka, he was very, very unhappy. He returned to the lands in 1262, where he amassed his army to attack the Mamluks and avenge the defeat at Ain Jalut. However, he was drawn into a separate civil war of the Mongols with Berke Khan, who, again, we will deal with the Golden Turk soon, but he had become a Muslim, and he was very, very upset at what he had done in Baghdad, because the Caliph was well known to him and a good friend. And again, a series of battles took place between Hyrcanus and his armies and Berke Khan and Nogia Khan, who was related on the Jokti side to Berke Khan as well. So that takes us really towards the Golden Horde headed by Arif. Do you want to take us through?
Yes, just to remind listeners that the westernmost Khanate, this was called the Golden Horde.
So this is touching towards Europe and Russia.
That's
and all
right.
that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this was founded by Batu, who was a son of Joki, in 1243 during the reign of Ogedei Khan. The Golden Horde, it included the Volga region, the mountains of the Urals, the steppes of the northern Black Sea, Fore Caucasus, western Siberia, the Aral Sea, and the Irtysh Basin. And it also held the principalities of Rus in tributary relations. After Batu had died in 1256, there was a number of untimely deaths from his line of succession. And it was his younger brother, Berke Khan, who had been converted to Islam, and he was enthroned as the leader, as the Khan of the Golden Horde in 1258. Berke had converted to Islam earlier, and this was to have a significant impact on his relationship with other members of the Mughal Empire, especially Halugu. He was a devout Muslim, and he was angered, as we mentioned before, by Halugu's destruction of Baghdad, and he was determined to deal with Halugu Khan, who had murdered the Caliph. And his territorial ambitions in Syria and Egypt threatened Berke's fallen Muslims. When Halugu returned to his lands in 1262, instead of being able to avenge his defeats by the Mamelukes at Amjad, he was drawn into a civil war with Berke Khan of the Golden Horde. The Muslim historian Rashid al-Din Hamadi, he quoted Berke Khan. Hamadani. He quoted Berke Khan as telling his Moguls and Muslim subjects in protest at the attack on Baghdad. Halugu.
This is a quote from Hamadani.
Yeah, okay. He said Halugu has sacked all the cities of the Muslims and has brought about the death of the Caliph. With the help of God, I will call him to account for so much innocent blood. So it's obviously showed him how upset he was. Halugu had massed his armies to avenge Angelut and attack the Mamelukes. However, as Berke Khan had agreed to support the Mamelukes, he initiated a series of raids in a force which drew Halugu north to meet him. And this was the first conflict, the first open conflict between the Mughals. This is sort of, you could say, where the Mughals started fighting with themselves. And, you could say that this signified the end of this unified empire. All empires eventually start fighting, you could say, with each other. And this was seen as that sort of first significant milestone. As a result, the conflict in 1262, this turned into basically open war. Halugu Khan's he suffered a severe defeat when he attempted to invade north of the Caucasus in 1263. His forces were crushed at the Tarik River by Berke's nephew, Nogai, who forced Halugu into retreat. Nogai Khan was given a high role in the army of the Golden Horde, and Rashid al-Din describes him basically as Berke's commander-in-chief.
He played a prominent role, basically, in the campaigns against Halugu and previously as well in terms of against the Europeans. Halugu Khan died in 1264 or towards the end of 1264, 1265. But Berke Khan and Nogai continued to push Halugu's son Abaka Khan. And ultimately, really, they defeated Halugu's armies, which slowly and steadily crumbled. And the Muslim lands, in many ways, were saved on the one side by a Mongol convert, Berke and Nogai and others, and on the other side by Sultan Baybars and Sultan Qutuz from the Mamluks as well. But that's another story. Of course, their descendants continued to rule the Golden Horde around the Russian plains, but eventually they lost out to the Europeans, the Russians, and the various tribes as it happened. So we've covered the four main Khanates. From a Muslim point of view, I think they were very lucky to get Berke Khan as a convert because he played a big role, and
I think
it changed the whole thing.
Absolutely, I think it's worth noting that the intervention by Berke Khan basically saved Mecca and Jerusalem.
Yeah.
That's what some historians believe. Otherwise, they could have had the same fate as Baghdad.
Yeah, and then you had Timur, a Mongol as well, convert to Islam, and his legacy is a separate story, I think, for one of our history programs, which we'll deal with. I think we're coming towards the end of our program. I hope listeners have enjoyed this fascinating story about the Mongol Empire, and especially the founder Genghis Khan. And please do give us your feedback at VI Living History through Twitter, and go to the website www.voiceofislam.co.uk to listen to this program, as well as many, many other programs. So until next time, Assalamu alaikum. Goodbye from Amjad as well, and goodbye from Arif. Assalamu alaikum.